The first sound I remember that night was laughter, Diane's voice, sharp and unfamiliar, rising above the others. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I wasn't even supposed to be home yet. I'd walked in through the garage, juggling 2 grocery bags I'd forgotten in the trunk earlier, when I heard it. Let him think whatever he wants. Men like Greg. They're always the last to figure out they've already lost. The words stopped me cold. My name, my life, dropped so casually in the middle of whatever secret conversation was happening in my own living room. I set the bags down on the counter as the laughter swelled again, high-pitched and cruel. I moved quietly, unsure if I even wanted to hear more. But I couldn't help myself. The doorway to the living room was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw Diane. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, wine glass in hand, her legs crossed like she was performing for an audience. She looked different. The casual ponytail and yoga pants she usually wore around the house were gone. In their place, there was a sleek, polished version of her I barely recognized, tight black dress, hair falling in perfect waves, and a smile that wasn't meant for me. I told him I was at yoga, she said, leaning back with a smirk. He doesn't even ask questions anymore. He just assumes. More laughter. One of her friends, a woman I barely knew, leaned forward conspiratorially. And he still has no idea? Not even a clue. Greg? Diane said, rolling her eyes. He couldn't spot a red flag if it smacked him in the face. As long as I keep dinner on the table and the laundry done, he thinks everything's perfect. I felt my chest tighten, the blood roaring in my ears. It was like I was watching a stranger wearing my wife's face. This wasn't the Diane I knew, the woman who used to text me silly pictures during the day, who cried at commercials, who whispered, "I love you," every night before we fell asleep. This Diane was cold. Calculating. And she was mocking me in front of a room full of people. The words that came next hit me like a freight train. I'm not going to feel guilty about it either. I deserve this. Hell, I've earned it. Another friend chimed in, clinking her glass against Diane's. Damn right you have. You've put up with enough over the years. Diane smirked, taking a long sip of wine. Exactly. And if he ever finds out, well, she shrugged, her smile widening. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. My hand gripped the edge of the counter so hard I thought the wood might splinter. I should have burst into the room right then, demanded answers, forced her to explain herself in front of all of them. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not shock. It was rage. Pure, focused rage, rising up in me like a storm I knew I'd need to control. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. Not yet. This was going to be a game. And Diane had no idea I was about to start playing. The next morning, Diane was in the kitchen, humming softly as she flipped through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her smile as effortless and familiar as it had always been. It almost made me second-guess everything I'd overheard the night before. Almost. Morning, sleepyhead, she chirped, pouring herself coffee. You were out like a light last night. Guess those late nights in your workshop are finally catching up to you. I studied her carefully, her casual tone, the way she seemed completely unfazed. There wasn't a trace of guilt or nervousness, just the same old Diane, going through the motions like the woman I thought I knew. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Guess I needed it. Inside, I was anything but calm. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there, to demand an explanation for every smug word she'd spoken the night before. But I knew better. Diane was clever, too clever. If I wanted the truth, I couldn't tip my hand just yet. Instead, I decided to play along. You still meeting the girls tonight? I asked casually, sipping my coffee. Her eyes flicked up briefly, and for a split second, I thought I saw something there, hesitation, maybe. But then it was gone, replaced by that same practiced ease. Yeah, it's book club night, she said, slipping her phone into her bag. I won't be late. What about you? Got any plans? Plans. The word hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been. I forced another smile. Just the usual. Tinkering in the garage, maybe catching up on some emails. She nodded, already moving toward the door. Sounds thrilling, she teased. Don't wait up, okay? The moment she was gone, I set my mug down and grabbed my keys. I wasn't going to spend another night in the dark, wondering what was real and what wasn't. If Diane thought she could lie to my face and laugh about me behind my back, she had another thing coming. By the time Diane's car pulled out of the driveway that evening, I was ready. I'd done my homework during the day, checking her calendar, scanning her emails on the shared family computer, even scrolling through her social media for any hints. She was careful, I'll give her that. No obvious red flags, no suspicious messages or photos. But people like Diane always leave breadcrumbs, even when they think they're being discreet. I followed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding as the miles ticked by. She wasn't heading to the cafe where her so-called book club usually met. Instead, she took a sharp turn onto a back road, winding toward the edge of town. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel, the kind with glowing lanterns and ivy climbing the walls. My stomach turned as I parked a few spaces away, keeping my head low. She stepped out of the car, her black dress hugging her figure in a way that made my jaw clench. For years, she'd been too tired to dress up for our date nights, but here she was, looking like $1,000,000 for someone else. The front door of the hotel opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a sharp suit that screamed money. Diane's face lit up when she saw him, her whole demeanor changing in an instant. She was radiant. Happy. And when he kissed her, long and slow, right there in the parking lot, it felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. This wasn't some casual fling, some harmless flirtation she could excuse away. This was calculated. Intentional. And judging by the way she melted into his arms, it had been going on for a long time. They disappeared into the hotel together, and I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. I should have stormed in after them, caused a scene, exposed her for the liar she was. But something stopped me. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. Not yet. If Diane wanted to play games, then I'd make damn sure she didn't see the end of this one coming. The next day, Diane was as cheerful as ever, humming to herself as she watered the plants on our front porch. Watching her, you'd think she was the perfect wife, loving, supportive, and entirely devoted. But I couldn't unsee the woman from the night before, laughing in the arms of another man, her betrayal as effortless as her smile now. I knew I had to keep playing my role. If I tipped her off too early, she'd cover her tracks, twist the narrative, and leave me chasing shadows. So I swallowed my anger and acted like nothing had changed. "Morning," I said, stepping onto the porch. She glanced up, her smile widening. "Morning, honey. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, leaning against the railing. "What about you?" "Late night with the book club." Her hand paused for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Yeah," she said, recovering quickly. "You know how we get, too much wine and not enough reading." I nodded, forcing a chuckle. "Sounds like a good time." Inside, I was seething. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, and she didn't even flinch. But I kept my cool. I needed to stay a step ahead of her, and that meant gathering evidence, not just for me, but for what I had planned. That afternoon, I drove to the hotel where I'd followed Diane the night before. My heart was pounding as I stepped inside, the faint scent of fresh flowers and polished wood filling the air. The receptionist, a young woman with bright eyes and a professional smile, looked up as I approached. "Hi there," I began, forcing a friendly tone. "I'm actually looking for some information. My wife and I are planning a little getaway, and she mentioned this place. I wanted to surprise her, but I can't remember the exact dates she said she was here last. Would you be able to help me out?" The receptionist hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "Well, we do take guest privacy very seriously." I leaned in conspiratorially. Of course, of course. I don't need anything too specific, just trying to match her schedule so I don't overlap with her book club or anything like that. You know how it is." After a moment's pause, she nodded. "Let me check." As she typed into her computer, my pulse raced. I half expected her to tell me she couldn't find anything, that Diane's visit was a figment of my imagination. But then she looked up, her expression neutral. She was here on Tuesday night, the receptionist said. Checked in at 7:15 p.m. and checked out the next morning. My stomach turned. Was it just her? I asked, trying to sound casual. The receptionist hesitated again. I'm sorry, sir, but I really can't disclose that information. I forced a smile, nodding as though I understood. Of course. Thanks for your help. As I walked back to my car, the pieces started falling into place. Diane wasn't just lying to me, she was constructing an entirely separate life, complete with alibis and a polished front. And she thought I'd never figure it out. But I wasn't done yet. Over the next few days, I started piecing together a timeline. I checked our shared bank account and found charges I'd overlooked before, dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, purchases from boutique stores she'd never mentioned. I even called her yoga studio, pretending to be interested in signing up, only to learn Diane hadn't attended a single class in months. Every discovery was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had. Then came the final piece. One evening, while Diane was in the shower, I accessed her email. She was meticulous about deleting messages, but a single overlooked thread was all I needed. The man's name was Alan. The emails were brief but damning, full of flirtatious jokes and thinly veiled innuendos. They'd been meeting regularly for months, scheduling their rendezvous like business appointments. My blood boiled as I read each message, the words blurring together in a haze of anger. But then I stopped. This wasn't just about Diane and Alan anymore. This was about me, about taking control of a situation she thought she had complete power over. If Diane wanted to live a double life, I'd let her. But she was about to find out just how dangerous it could be to underestimate me. The next week, I put my plan into motion. Diane didn't suspect a thing, her routine stayed the same, her lies as polished as ever. If anything, she seemed even more carefree, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching her every move. It started with small things. I accidentally left my phone on the kitchen counter with a calendar notification popping up, dinner with Dave, 7 p.m., Thursday. Diane noticed it almost immediately, her eyes flicking to the screen before she casually asked, "Oh, what's the dinner about?" "Just work stuff," I replied, shrugging. "Dave's introducing me to some new clients. Shouldn't be too late." She nodded, feigning disinterest, but I could see the gears turning in her head. She thought she had free rein to do whatever she wanted that night. And that's exactly what I wanted her to think. Thursday came quickly. Diane dressed up as she always did for her book club, slipping on another sleek dress that made her look like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. As she kissed me goodbye, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, disgust, but also a grim satisfaction. "I won't wait up," I said, giving her a quick smile. "Don't," she replied, with that same effortless confidence that had fooled me for months. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my own keys. I already knew where she was going, another rendezvous at the boutique hotel. But this time, I wasn't just going to follow her. I was going to make sure she'd never forget this night. I parked a block away from the hotel and waited, my heart pounding as I watched Diane's car pull into the lot. Alan was already there, leaning casually against his car like some soap opera villain. When Diane stepped out, he greeted her with a kiss, his hand lingering on her waist. I clenched the steering wheel, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment for an outburst. Not yet. Once they disappeared inside, I moved quickly. My plan had required a bit of preparation, nothing too elaborate, just enough to ensure Diane and Alan wouldn't have the private evening they were expecting. First, I called the hotel's front desk, disguising my voice just enough to sound like a concerned patron. "Hi, this is Alan Mitchell in room 208. I think there's an issue with the air conditioning, it's making a really loud noise. Could you send someone up to check it out?" The receptionist assured me they'd take care of it immediately. Perfect. Next, I made my way inside. The lobby was quiet, and no one paid me much attention as I slipped into the stairwell. I'd already scoped out the layout online and knew exactly where I needed to go. Outside room 208, I waited, listening for any signs of movement inside. When I heard laughter, Diane's laughter, it took everything in me not to kick the door down. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small device I'd picked up earlier that week, a wireless camera disguised as a phone charger. I quickly plugged it into the outlet near the door. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Then I slipped back down the stairs, my heart racing. Back in my car, I pulled up the camera's feed on my phone. It wasn't perfect, just a wide-angle view of the bed and part of the sitting area, but it was enough. Enough to see Diane laughing, her arms around Alan as they shared a bottle of wine. Enough to confirm every suspicion I'd had. I didn't watch for long. This wasn't about torturing myself, it was about having the proof I needed. When Diane came home later that night, she looked as radiant as ever, her cheeks flushed and her smile soft. "Didn't mean to wake you," she said, slipping off her heels. I grunted from the couch, pretending to be half asleep. "No problem. How was book club?" "Oh, you know," she replied, her voice casual. Same old, same old." I nodded, hiding the smirk that threatened to break across my face. Same old, same old. Not for long. Diane had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, Diane went about her usual routine like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out for her errands, leaving behind the scent of her perfume, a smell I now associated with deceit. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone. But I wasn't reading the news or checking emails. I was replaying the footage from the hotel room. It wasn't just the visual proof that burned, it was the sound of her laughter, her voice dripping with affection she hadn't shown me in years. I could have confronted her right then and there, but I wasn't ready for it to end yet. Diane thought she was in control, that she could keep living her double life without consequences. It was time to turn the tables. That afternoon, I paid a visit to someone who I knew would make things interesting, Diane's sister, Emily. Emily and Diane had a complicated relationship. They were close, sure, but Emily had always been a little envious of Diane's seemingly perfect life, her house, her marriage, her social circle. And while I'd never been particularly close to Emily, I knew one thing for certain: she loved gossip, especially when it came with a side of drama. "Greg," she said, surprised to see me when she opened the door. "This is unexpected." "Hey, Emily," I said, forcing a sheepish smile. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, but I need your advice on something." "About Diane?" Her eyebrows shot up. "About Diane? What's going on?" I hesitated, letting the silence stretch just long enough to pique her curiosity. Then I sighed, like I was carrying the weight of the world. "I think she's been keeping something from me," I said, my voice low. "I'm not sure how to handle it." Emily's eyes lit up, not with concern, but with that unmistakable glint of someone who couldn't resist a juicy secret. "Keeping something? Like what?" I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking just enough to sell the act. I played the footage from the hotel, carefully angling the screen so she could see it but not snatch it away. Her jaw dropped. "Oh my God. Is that?" "Yes," I said, cutting her off. "That's Diane. And that's not exactly book club, is it?" Emily stared at the screen, her face a mix of shock and something else, satisfaction. "I can't believe this. She's been lying to you." "For months," I said. "And I need your help." Her eyes narrowed. "Help? With what?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I want her to know she can't get away with this. But I don't want to confront her outright, not yet. I need someone on the inside, someone who can push her a little, get her to slip up." Emily hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Oh, Greg. You've come to the right person." Over the next few days, Emily worked her magic. She invited Diane out for coffee, subtly steering the conversation toward me, our marriage, and any stress Diane might have been feeling. Diane, predictably, took the bait. "It's not that Greg's a bad guy," she said, according to Emily's careful retelling. "He's just predictable. Boring. I've given up so much for this life, and I'm finally doing something for myself." Emily relayed every word to me with glee, her excitement barely contained. "She doesn't suspect a thing," she said one evening over the phone. "She thinks I'm on her side." "Perfect," I replied. "Let her think that." The best part was that Diane's arrogance made her careless. She started slipping, staying out later than usual, leaving her phone unlocked on the counter, even letting Alan text her during the day. Every slip gave me more ammunition. The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. Diane left her laptop open one evening, a document still on the screen. It was a detailed itinerary, weekend getaways, reservations, and even an upcoming anniversary dinner with Alan at the very restaurant where I'd proposed to her. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. She wasn't just betraying me, she was rewriting our history, taking something sacred and turning it into her private joke. It was the last straw. I closed the laptop, my mind racing with possibilities. Diane thought she was in control, that she could humiliate me in secret and waltz through life without consequences. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The night of Diane and Alan's anniversary dinner, I was ready. Every detail of my plan had been carefully crafted, every move calculated to ensure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. Diane had spent the afternoon getting ready, humming to herself as she did her hair and makeup. She looked radiant, wearing the same dress she'd worn on our 10th wedding anniversary. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. "Big night?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorway of our bedroom. She turned, startled for just a moment before masking it with a smile. "Just the usual book club. You know how we like to make it special sometimes." "Special?" "Right." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Have fun." She kissed me lightly on the cheek and walked out the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The moment she was gone, I grabbed my jacket and left through the back door. I'd already arranged everything with Emily, who had proven to be an invaluable accomplice. She was waiting for me near the restaurant, her car parked discreetly a few blocks away. "You're sure about this?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Absolutely," I said, my jaw clenched. "She wants to rewrite our history. Let's see how she likes being the center of attention." Emily smirked, revving the engine. "Then let's give her a show." The restaurant was one of those upscale places with dim lighting and soft piano music, the kind of place where everyone pretends they're too refined to eavesdrop on the tables around them. Diane and Alan were seated near the center, their heads close together as they sipped wine and laughed. From our spot near the entrance, Emily and I watched as the waiter brought out a small cake with "Happy Anniversary" written in elegant script. Diane's smile was dazzling as Alan leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Emily nudged me. "You ready? Let's do it." I stood, straightening my jacket, and walked calmly toward their table. Diane didn't notice me at first, she was too busy gazing at Alan like he'd hung the moon. But as I stopped beside their table, her smile faltered. "Greg," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alan looked up, confused. "Who's this?" I ignored him, my eyes fixed on Diane. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," I said, my voice cold. "Funny, I don't remember us making a reservation here tonight." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for something to say. Alan glanced between us, realization dawning. "Wait a minute," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're her husband." "Yes," I said, turning to him with a tight smile. "And you must be Alan. I've heard so much about you." By now, the other diners were starting to notice. Heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her composure cracking under the weight of the attention. "Greg, let's talk about this somewhere private," she said, her voice pleading. "Oh, I don't think so," I replied, pulling a small envelope from my pocket. "You see, I've spent months gathering proof of your extracurricular activities. And I think it's only fair that Alan here gets to see exactly who he's been whining and dining." I dropped the envelope on the table, the photos spilling out, images of Diane and Alan at the hotel, at the boutique shops, even one of them kissing in the parking lot. Alan's face darkened as he stared at the evidence, his jaw tightening. "What the hell is this, Diane?" "I can explain," she stammered, reaching for his hand. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I cut in. "And if you'd like more details, Alan, feel free to check your email. I've sent you a full timeline, complete with receipts and messages." Diane's eyes widened, panic flooding her expression. "Greg, stop this. Please. I leaned in close, my voice low enough that only she could hear. Stop. Like you stopped lying to me. Like you stopped laughing about me behind my back. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I straightened, glancing around the room at the wide-eyed diners. Enjoy your evening, I said, turning on my heel and walking away. Emily was waiting by the door, grinning ear to ear. That was incredible. Not done yet, I muttered, pulling out my phone. As we stepped outside, I pressed send on an email I'd queued earlier that day. It contained the same damning photos and messages, sent to Diane's closest friends, family members, and even her coworkers. By the time Diane got home that night, her double life would be in ruins. I didn't go home that night. I needed distance, space to breathe and process everything. I'd planned the evening meticulously, knowing Diane would walk into the wreckage of her carefully constructed facade. But as much as I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done, I couldn't ignore the heavy ache in my chest. This was the woman I'd loved for decades, the woman I'd built a life with. Even as my anger burned white-hot, there was a part of me, small and pathetic, that still mourned what we'd lost. I spent the night in a cheap motel on the edge of town, watching bad TV and nursing a bottle of whiskey I'd picked up from a gas station. My phone buzzed relentlessly, calls, texts, voicemails, all from Diane. I didn't answer a single one. The next morning, I returned home to a scene that could have been plucked straight from a soap opera. Diane was sitting on the front porch, her hair disheveled, her makeup smudged from tears. She looked up when I pulled into the driveway, her eyes bloodshot and desperate. "Greg," she said, scrambling to her feet as I got out of the car. "Please, just talk to me. I can explain everything." I walked past her without a word, unlocking the front door and stepping inside. She followed me, her voice growing more frantic with each step. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "It wasn't what you think. Alan, he doesn't mean anything to me. It was just, I don't know, a distraction, a mistake. Please, Greg, you have to believe me." I rounded on her, my calm facade finally cracking. "A mistake?" I spat. "You call months of lying to my face a mistake? You call sneaking around with him, mocking me with your friends, rewriting our life, that's a mistake to you?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice shaking. "You destroyed everything we built. For what? For some thrill? For the chance to feel young again?" Diane crumpled onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the memory of her laughter, her voice dripping with contempt as she bragged to her friends about fooling me. "I was lonely," she whispered. "You stopped seeing me, Greg. You were always working, always busy. I didn't know how to tell you how I felt, and Alan, he made me feel alive again." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Alive? You felt alive by tearing me apart? By turning our marriage into a joke?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what you need, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Please, Greg. I can't lose you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. For a moment, I hesitated. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built, the promises we'd made. But then I thought about the emails, the photos, the way she'd smirked as she kissed another man. "Anything?" I asked, my voice low. She nodded quickly. "Anything. I'll make this right, I swear." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Then pack your things and leave. Because I'm done." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her expression. "Greg, no. Please. We can fix this." "No, Diane," I said firmly. "You don't get to rewrite this story. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." I turned and walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos. Diane tried everything, calls, texts, even showing up at my work, to plead her case. But I was done listening. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd thrown it away like it meant nothing. Meanwhile, the fallout from my email was spreading like wildfire. Diane's friends and family were shocked, her reputation in shambles. Even Alan, the man she'd risked everything for, had apparently ghosted her after the restaurant debacle. Emily kept me updated, relishing the drama as Diane's perfect world crumbled around her. "She's a mess," she said during one of our calls. "She doesn't know who to turn to. It's like she's finally realizing how much she's lost." Good, I thought. Let her feel it. Let her sit in the ruins of her own making. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. And it felt damn good. A week passed, and Diane had finally stopped calling. The house was eerily quiet without her, no clinking wine glasses, no humming in the kitchen, no sarcastic quips that used to drive me crazy. For years, I'd thought of our home as a sanctuary, a place where we built our lives together. Now, it felt more like a crime scene. Every corner of it reminded me of what she'd done, the lies, the betrayal, the years I'd spent blind to it all. I was sitting in the living room, sorting through a stack of legal documents for the divorce, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Diane standing there, clutching a folder in one hand and a box in the other. She looked thinner, more worn, like she hadn't slept in days. "Greg," she said softly. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but, can I come in? Please." I stared at her for a long moment before stepping aside. "You've got 5 minutes." She stepped inside, her eyes darting around the house like she was seeing it for the first time. It must have hit her then, this wasn't her home anymore. "What do you want?" I asked, crossing my arms. She set the box on the coffee table and opened the folder, pulling out a small stack of papers. "I've been working on this all week," she said, her voice trembling. "It's everything. Every charge, every hotel stay, every text I ever sent to him. I wanted you to have the full picture." I glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. "Why? So you can clear your conscience?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Because you deserve the truth. I should have given it to you a long time ago, but I was too much of a coward." I didn't say anything, letting the silence stretch between us. Diane sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I lost Alan," she said quietly. "After that night at the restaurant, he told me he wasn't looking for complications. I guess I was just another thrill for him." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at her words but kept my face neutral. She gestured to the box. "And this, it's everything of ours that I've been holding on to. Old letters, photos, little mementos from trips we took. I thought maybe you'd want them, or maybe you'd want to throw them away. I just couldn't keep them anymore." I looked at the box, then back at her. "Why are you really here, Diane?" She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I'm begging you, Greg. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I can't fix what I've done, but I can try to make things right, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I stared at her, my mind racing. I thought about all the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the rage that had consumed me. I thought about the man I'd been before all this, the man who trusted, who believed in love, who would have done anything for her. That man was gone. "You want my forgiveness?" I asked, my voice cold. "Here's what I think of your truth, your guilt, and your little box of memories." I picked up the box, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it in. The flames roared to life, consuming the past she'd so carefully curated. Diane gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Greg, no. I'm done carrying this, Diane," I said, my tone unwavering. "And I'm done carrying you." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I saw the weight of her choices crushing her. She looked broken, like a shadow of the woman she used to be. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned away, staring into the flames. "So am I." Without another word, she left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the empty house. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. The divorce process moved forward without much resistance from Diane. She seemed to accept the inevitability of it, her energy spent, her defiance gone. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. The house, which once felt haunted by memories of her, began to feel like mine again. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, even replaced the bed we'd shared for so many years. With every change, I reclaimed a little more of myself. Diane moved into a small apartment across town. From what I heard through Emily, who still delighted in keeping me updated, she was struggling. Her friends had distanced themselves, Alan was long gone, and her once pristine reputation had been irreparably damaged. One day, a package arrived at my door. It was from Diane. Inside was a single letter, written in her familiar, looping handwriting. Greg. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. Losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced, and I know it's entirely my fault. I didn't appreciate what I had until it was gone. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away because I was selfish and stupid. I don't expect you to forgive me, I know I don't deserve it. But I hope, one day, you can find it in your heart to let go of the anger. Not for me, but for yourself. Thank you for the years you gave me, for the love and the life we shared. I'll carry those memories with me always, even if I don't deserve them. I'm sorry. For everything. Diane. I stared at the letter for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to rip it to shreds, to reject her attempt at closure. But another part, the part that had loved her for decades, felt an odd sense of relief. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not ready to decide what it meant to me. Maybe I'd revisit it someday. Or maybe I wouldn't. What mattered now was that I was free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the weight of a marriage that had crumbled long before I'd realized it. A year later, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a beer in hand. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange and gold. I thought about Diane less often these days, and when I did, it was more like a distant memory than an open wound. She'd reached out a few times over the past year, her messages always the same, apologies, please for another chance, assurances that she'd changed. I never responded. I'd learned something important through all of this: forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, the best way to move forward is to let go completely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't the man I used to be, naive, trusting, blind to the cracks in my life. I was stronger now, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I felt something that had eluded me for far too long. Happiness.